Welcome to Massey Dialogues. Massey College is a place for ideas. It's a place that has for mission to nourish learning and serve the public good. Massey College, the physical location, is located on Indigenous land, the cherished land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are forever grateful for the ability to continue to do our work here. To serve the public good, we've decided that we needed to bring new people into the conversation. So Massey Dialogues are based on the fact that we need to build bridges between the academic world, between the people that are out there, and bridges between generations. So we will always bring the voice of our junior fellows, the people who are studying now and are the voice of the future. And today we are so delighted, I'm a big fan, to have Jerry Dias with us, a great leader, Unifor national president, who's been at the forefront for the fight for workers' rights, equality, and social justice for many years. Jerry has been in the labor movement since he started his work life at the Avalon Aircraft, now Bombardier Aerospace, where he served as president of Local 112. He went on to join the union's national staff as the representative for the aerospace sector, and he became assistant to the CAW national president. In 2013, he was elected as Unifor's first national president at the union's founding convention, and since then, Unifor, as we know, has grown to represent more than 315,000 workers in every sector of the Canadian economy. He's taken on corporate giants. He's been out there working and supporting and arguing for greater equality. Certainly, I think for equality for women, equality for all groups in society. He's been part, as you probably have seen him on TV, he's been part of, played an active role in the negotiation of the new NAFTA agreement, where he argued for certainly rigorous labor standards, maintaining Canadian sovereignty, and protecting key domestic industries. He's a committed trade unionist, so has been kind of quite vocal on emerging labor issues that I hope we're going to talk about today: the precarious work, youth employment, underemployment, and certainly income inequality. So we will be, he's had numerous awards. The most recent one is the Toronto Star Wheels 2016 Newsmaker of the Year, Automotive News All-Star for the last 3 years. And certainly I think he's been named by Sun News one of the most fearsome person in Canada. So that's quite the one of the most powerful person. He was named by Maclean's and Canada's most influential union leader by Ottawa Life. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Jerry, for being with us today.
Pleasure is always mine.
That's it. Yes. And so we will have Stephanie Bertolo, who's a first year in their Master of Public Policy in 2018. She graduated from McMaster's University with a Bachelor of Arts and Science and minor in Community Engagement. She served as the Vice President Education for the McMaster's Union. She's been in student politics, leading the organization's government relations and advocacy efforts on all 3 levels of government. Her research interests include urban and health policy and discovering how policy can create healthy, equitable communities. She's a proud person from Hamilton, always speaks about Hamilton, and she likes exploring Hamilton's waterfalls, art galleries, coffee shops. And I guess now, I don't know what you do with you're stuck at home, but in Hamilton, I guess. So it's lovely. And Dr. Sylvia Bashevkin, who is a professor, well-known professor at the Department of Political Science at University of Toronto. She's a senior fellow of Massey College. She's really well known for incredible contribution in the field of women in politics. She served as the president of the Canadian Political Science Association, president of the Women in Politics Research Section at the American Political Science Association, fellow of the Royal Society, and she received in 2014 the Mildred Schwartz Lifetime Achievement Award in Canadian Politics from the American Political Science Association. So welcome, all three of you. Merci. Thank you very much for being on Massey Dialogue. Let me start with you, Jerry. I know, and many people know, that unionization is one of the single most important way in which economic disparities get to be weakened and working lives improve. And now, we see it on the news. The workers in nursing homes are hurting badly. The workers in grocery stores don't look like they're doing that much better. Does that change the role of unions now? Are you arguing for something different than you did in the past?
No, as a matter of fact, we're arguing the same things today that we have for decades. Mm-hmm. What are we talking about? Fairness, justice, equality, resolving inequality, arguing about why women make 70% of what men do for making the same, for doing the same jobs. But then take a look at the pandemic. Look what's happened. The jobs that were deemed to be lower skilled, jobs that have predominantly been precarious, part-time, non-standard, casual. Well, when it hits the walls, what are the jobs that are the most important today? We're not talking about the jobs in the gig economy today. We're talking about PSWs and long-term care facilities. We're talking about grocery store workers. We're talking about transit drivers. We're talking about women that work in shelters. We're talking about truck drivers. We're talking about the airline workers. We're talking about the workers who, I will argue, historically have not received their just pay. I take a look at the healthcare sector, where we represent 30,000 in the healthcare sector, probably about 15,000 PSWs. If I look at the urban centers, it's probably about 95% women, 85% immigrant women. Mm-hmm. Public PSWs, personal support workers, that at the high end of the pay scale make about $20 an hour. But the majority, I will argue, are at minimum wage. Mm-hmm. I take a look at grocery store workers in Newfoundland, where 50% make $12 an hour or less. Mm-hmm. Now here we are, 2020, pandemic. Who are we depending on to survive? Those that have been, I will argue, ill-treated and not respected for the roles that they played in the society. So the roles of unions, I will argue, haven't changed. The difference is during the pandemic, people are listening because we've been talking about the shortage in long-term care facilities, retirement homes, nursing homes. We've been talking about overwork, underpay. We've been talking about lack of treatment for our seniors. We've been talking about for-profit instead of for people as it relates to depending on our seniors, and here we are, where we have thousands and thousands of personal support workers that aren't at work today. Why? Because they left the field. Why? Because they're paid so little. They had to work 2-3 jobs. Now all of a sudden we're saying, hey, hold on, you can't work in 2-3 different workplaces anymore. Because of the pandemic, you're taking the disease from one workplace to another. Well, hello. If people were paid a decent wage and had full-time jobs and benefits, they wouldn't have to work in 2-3 locations. We wouldn't have personal support workers, unemployed today because they just left the industry because of the lack of respect. So, look, you better get to the other panelists, because if I get on a rant, I'll take up a whole hour myself.
Well, before you get too far into it, so you're continuing to argue. Obviously, you're going to have to argue for better pay. I mean, it's starting. There is some recognition that people have been underpaid. Is the worry that this is not going to last further than the pandemics? That basically now we're just paying attention, and then after that, the real struggle will be to maintain the gains that may have been acquired during the pandemic. Is that going to be the strategy?
No, we're talking about it already. I mean, we started negotiating wage premiums. The first place was actually at the Rexall drugstores prior to the pandemic hitting full bore, and then a lot of the grocery stores. And then, of course, governments followed suit saying, we've got a real problem here. We better start to respect the wages. But The employers will definitely try to claw it back once we get by the panic mode that everyone is in right now for good reasons. We're not going to let them. I mean, there will be a lot of disputes if, in fact, people try to digress back to the status quo. One of the problems we have with the low pay, for example, in healthcare, is the lack. They don't have the right to strike. And you'll ask public service workers, and they'll say, "Look, I don't want to strike. I have this infatuation with my work and this inherent respect for the people that I take care of. There's a bond that is just impossible to take away, nor should you try." But because of this incredible loyalty, people are being exploited. I think about negotiated wage increases where, they'll like an arbitrator will give them a 1% wage increase a year. Well, 1% of nothing is nothing. So that's why, and I always argue, by the way, 95% of personal support workers are women.
Yeah.
If 95% of personal support workers were men, we wouldn't be having this conversation because the wages would be higher.
Yeah. Well, I think you're in good company here. You have 3 women with you, so that's the right thing to say here.
Progressive women, I'm in my element today.
But so you've been arguing for increase in pay, and then there's the entire health and safety aspect that continues to be of concern. When we're talking about reopening, what are you watching? What are your concerns about the slow reopening?
Well, we have to make sure that greed doesn't trump common sense. Like, we have to make sure that before you even think about reopening a workplace, regardless of the environment, that all the precautions are in place, that the workers have been talked to. They understand the safety precautions that have been taken. So, for example, let me give you the best examples I can. We've opened up 2 auto plants yesterday. And very slowly at that, and at a staged reopening. So in St. Catharines, which builds powertrains, we brought back 300 workers, 1 shift, and people are nervous and cautious for all the right reasons. But I think people were shocked when they came in and they saw what was done, because we've worked hand in hand with the employers. We're not leaving it up to the employers to say, look, everything is good. Look what just happened in Cargill out in Alberta. 2 weeks later, everything is good. Come back to work. No, it's not. So we are very much in control of our work environments, our workplaces. And I can tell you right now, if we're not comfortable, they're not reopening.
So essentially it's a vigilance role, so being there, watching, and how do you do that with social distancing? How are you organize a union now with the social distancing?
Well, during the pandemic, a lot of engineers have been busy. So before we even get into the workplace, you have to go through an infrared scan that'll check your temperature. And if you're off, you're not going into the workplace, you're taken immediately to the medical facilities. But it's all done. I mean, all the jobs have been re-engineered so that you can do the social distancing. I think that's why you're going to see mass production. It's not going to happen for quite a while you're implementing social distancing. There's been a lot of, for example, duties within an assembly plant where it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So that's why the whole way of assembling is different now. Things are much more guarded, much more safe today than they ever were. But then just the precautions, everything from the cleaning, the constant cleaning, the high touch areas, the sanitizing, the masks, the personal protective equipment, the training. But before anybody even steps in a workplace or sitting in a classroom, social distance and walking through the rules and regulations. What's expected at work? What's expected when you go home? How?
So do you think
we're looking at a much different world, I will argue, for a long, long time.
So, and that will change the role of unions. I assume you'll have to have more health and safety inspectors, or that's going to be top of mind so do you have to almost reorganize union work as well?
Well, let me go down to the non-union workplaces. Our phones are ringing off the hook. There's a lot of workers that said, I don't need a union, I don't need a union. And all of a sudden today are saying, I need a union, I need a union, I need a union. Okay. Because all of a sudden when the pandemic hit, there was no rhyme or reason for a lot of the decisions that people made. So a lot of people were sent home. A lot of people don't know if they're coming back. A lot of people were sent home first, even though they were at the workplace the longest. So there was a lot of arbitrary decisions made. And like I said, our phone is ringing off the hook because the workers in non-union environments are watching union leaders yell from the top of their soapboxes as to what needs to be done, talking about health and safety, talking about workers' rights. And all of a sudden, they're sitting in an environment where they don't feel they have any. And they don't think there's a lot of fairness attached to what's going on. So I think there has been a real education of a lot of people as to the merits of unions and why they want to believe that, and why they want to belong to them.
Well, let me bring the voice of the future here about, so Stephanie, do you see this as being a time where we may reinvest in unionization as a way of ensuring better equality? Is that, as a young person, is that how you feel? Are you unionized yourself? Oh, you work for the government, so you may be unionized.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's just a summer job right now, but yes, I think, we're seeing the value of unions a lot more right now. Like we were mentioning, a lot of the frontline workers are low wage, ununionized, a lot of vulnerable individuals, a lot of new immigrants, a lot of women, a lot of racialized people are in these jobs, and they don't have the same advocacy right now because they aren't represented by a union. So I think we'll see that that will come into play, and it's really important. Like when we think of sick days, for instance, a lot of these people don't have paid sick days, and how they have to go into work and how they might unintentionally put other people at risk and result in another outbreak. And it's not their fault because if they don't go into work, they don't get paid, and then they can't put food on their table. So it's hard for them just to take a day off precautionarily. So I definitely think that unions are going to play a big role moving forward after we get out of this initial stage.
What you work on? You're doing a master in public policy here. So what are the angle about this crisis and about that you're concerned about as for your research work, but also for your future career?
I think how I'm thinking of it a lot is about cities and how we design our cities to help prevent future outbreaks and how we protect people. Cities are hubs for labor and hubs for jobs. So we need to make sure that when people are coming back to the cities, that they are protected, that we have protections on transit to make sure people are able to socially distance or that transit is properly sanitized. And on top of that, of course, the transit workers are safe. And because, again, a lot of low-income people can't afford cars. They can only afford one car. We have to think about how they're getting to work and how do we make sure that everyone's protected in our communities.
So the whole spectrum of the way in which the life of work is organized will have to be rethought, maybe. Let's bring in Sylvia there. So the feminist analysis on what's going on. Sylvia, any thoughts on what you heard up to now?
Sure. I actually have a piece, I think, coming out tomorrow in Policy Options that argues that this pandemic has had particular consequences for women in Canada. If we begin with who's in long-term care, there are about 2 women for every man over the age of 85 in Canada. And so lots of the women who are living in long-term care facilities are affected by this pandemic. As Jerry pointed out, many of the PSWs and nurses and cleaners in these facilities are women. Lots of them are immigrants and visible minorities. Many of them do not have union protections. But this is tough for women at many levels. I think of Dr. Theresa Tam, our Chief Public Health Officer in Canada, who was the target of some very personalized criticism from some political leaders in this country. So I do think that this is an opportunity to revalue half the population. And I think that Jerry's point about what happens after things calm down is very significant, because if we look, for example, at childcare, one of the major reasons a lot of women cannot work right now is because there aren't schools, and childcare facilities, even the ones that are for essential workers, have in many cases, I think in Toronto, for example, have had outbreaks of COVID-19. So it's very hard. And we know in World War II, for example, that governments invested in childcare, but that all disappeared after the war. So we know from history that there may be, changes in what we pay attention to during crises, but we are not sure that the changes that are introduced will actually be lasting. And I think that's why we need the organizational infrastructure, for example, with social movements and trade unions, to make sure that the changes that we want to see happen are entrenched in a way that they don't just disappear.
So that's the important part, the transformative aspect of this crisis. Churchill used to say, no good crisis should go wasted, and so we want to use this crisis to learn about and expose some social inequalities, resolve them, and then not let it go. So you're saying social movement, you're saying unionization, and then obviously we know that there will be lots of pressure because we'll be poor. We'll have a big recession is being advertised right, left, and center now. So how are we going to respond? Is that a fear for you, Jerry, when you see the right-wing side starting to say, well, we're spending money like there's no tomorrow, there will be huge deficit, bankruptcies are on the rise, and so on. What's your response?
Listen, I've never, ever in my life seen so many right-wing, staunch conservatives behave like socialists. Never. I've never seen the corporate wealth saying, please give me more. Please, Mr. Government, I want the handout yesterday. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a bunch of raging socialists in my life. So it's interesting because I debated Perrin Beatty, and I debated the head of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Mm-hmm. When the government moved from a 10% wage top up to 75%.
Yeah.
And how we were all singing on the same song sheet. We were all singing in unison about how important it was. And I reminded them at the end of the debate, and it was on power and politics. I said, I will remind the two of you of this conversation because the next time the Doug Fords of the world eliminate the minimum wage increases to $15 an hour and freezes it at 14, I'll remind you of this conversation of those who are impacted. The public service workers, the healthcare workers, the grocery store workers, all the workers that we're stumbling and tripping over to thank today are the workers that get disadvantaged by that type of Neanderthal government policy. So I believe when you listen to the Doug Fords of the world say, listen, we're going to give people a $4 an hour wage increase. For him, that's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult for him to even think it, yet alone say it, yet alone legislate it, because the first thing that he did, same with Jason Kenney, and I can walk through the collection of the other right-wingers in government today. First thing they do is they go after working class people. First thing they do is they go after minimum wage. The first thing they do is eliminate any sort of workers' rights, labor law reform. First thing they did. Now, all of a sudden, those same people that they disadvantaged, they're coming out today and saying, hey, hold on here. They're getting the short end of the stick and we better do more. So we'll see. I think the difference today is that it's not just, this blind following of the right-wing ideology. I think working class people are sitting there today saying, hey, hold on here. Thank you very much. They're putting up signs in their house, thanking the COVID heroes. They're understanding who was there for them, who's putting their life on the line. And no disrespect, but it's not the lawyers, and it's not the stockbrokers that are putting their life on the lines today. Yeah. It's working class people. Mm-hmm. And so the debate has changed, and I think the debate has also changed for how we care for our elderly. And I think the governments now are struggling because, look, in the province of Ontario, who's the one that moved to privatizing long-term care facilities? Mike Harris. Mm-hmm. Who is the chairman of the board today at Chartwell, making $250,000 a year? Mike Harris took care of himself. They took care of him. Thank you very much. And if I look at our members that work for Chartwell, I got to argue till I'm blue in the face to get him a quarter increase.
Mhm.
So I think of all the casual workers, part-times, his $250,000 salary would hire 10 people in long-term care facilities. So people are thinking about that today. People are watching this saying, oh, hold on here. Maybe the pendulum swung a little too far to the right. So I think there's a real debate going on, and I don't think it's going to go away soon, about what is work really worth and what's fair.
And so that's been the feminist credo for so many times. What's women's worth? What's the work of women? Is it worth enough? Is it paid enough? Is it recognized enough? So, Sylvia, anything that you want to add to this when you look at the pendulum? Whether are you confident that finally women's work could be noticed and rewarded?
Well, I always hope for the best, but I am a bit realistic in preparing for the worst. So I think one of the things we have to think about is the regulation of long-term care, right? Because even if we're going to talk about a sector that we want to see more public ownership, public control, public oversight, there will probably always be some place for some private, just like in our healthcare system, there's elements of it that remain private, but highly regulated. And so one of the questions about our governments is the extent to which they're prepared to do more, for example, than monitor by telephone, which some people say is what's going on right now in long-term care. Mm-hmm. That the facilities are only getting, like telephone visits from the regulators. Mm-hmm. So I guess one of the questions here is, have we also got over this love affair with what political scientists call captured bureaucracies, which is a civil service which does nothing more than echo what the sector it's supposedly regulating is demanding. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we have these captured bureaucracies that really are not serving the public at all, when you look at the state of long-term care, for example, you really have to ask how governments are going to change that pattern, which I don't think is peculiar to long-term care, but we're seeing it particularly with the numbers of infections and deaths in those homes.
What about you, Stephanie? I wonder, when you're living through this COVID crisis, you're hearing Jerry, you're hearing Sylvia. Do you think you're well prepared? Do you think your Master of Public Policy prepares you for the challenges that they're highlighting?
Oh wow. I think we're taught the tools to try to take any crisis or any new problem and try to learn how to solve it, how to think about different perspectives. But no, we never really, in my first year, we never studied a pandemic and how you change an entire economy, how you change government to respond to that quickly. We're taught a lot about the policy process and how it's a little bit slower and bureaucratic, but we don't have time for that right now. You have to create things quickly, and hopefully you get it right. So I hope I'm prepared, but it's always hard. You never really know what the future holds and how you can prepare the generation to handle those issues.
So, but it's interesting when I hear, we're, both Sylvia and Jerry are talking about transformative visions here almost, to move from light touch bureaucracy, light touch oversight to a much more embracive oversight. Jerry, when you're talking about now the government is partly owners of many of these corporations that have had lots of handouts, will that allow big government to actually reflect social democratic goals or just return to the good old days? So the transformative, how do we canalize this transformative power to move forward? Jerry, are you thinking about where do you want to be in 3 years? What's the objective of Unifor in the next 3 years?
Oh, I've been thinking about it nonstop, I can assure you. So let's talk about the whole argument about historical corporate bailouts. Mm-hmm. So I think about the fact that we've lost 560,000 manufacturing jobs here in Canada in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I asked myself, are we better off as a society? Are there better opportunities for the Stephanies, the young people of the world? Is the gig economy where the jobs are going to be? Is that where the good standard of living is going to be in the long term? I will argue no. There's some advantages, clearly some disadvantages. But back on the whole point of the bailouts that you wrote. So who did we bail out? The auto industry, the aerospace industry, some of the large manufacturers, some of the large, huge employers. And everybody yelled and screamed, nah, it's a corporate bailout. Don't do it. Now, here we are in a pandemic. Uh-oh. Who did we ask to make personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, ventilators, respirators? Ford, General Motors, Martin Ria, Magna, Autoliv, the booze makers, Iron Walkers, my gang. The manufacturers are the ones that, based on the technology they've developed, were able to pivot. I don't know how many people in the gig economy today are making masks or any sort of personal protective equipment. The point that I'm trying to make is it's a different debate. So when people say to me, look, those manufacturing jobs are gone. They're prehistoric. Don't worry about it. That's not the future. Really? Where would we have been if not for those manufacturing jobs? The other side of it is I think this has really shown us how ill-prepared we are as a nation to take care of ourselves. You know, as a nation, we are rich in raw materials and natural resources, highly educated workforce, probably one of the best nations in the world when it comes to having the tools to survive and the tools to excel. And what did we do? We decided that it's in our best interest to be a branch plant economy for other nations around the world. So here we are, depending on every other country for our safety, depending on China, Taiwan. I can start to walk through the list of the nations that we're depending on to provide the personal protective equipment. Look at Donald Trump telling 3M, don't ship the masks to Canada. We can't even take care of ourselves. So I will argue that this pandemic better have shown us a lot of things, that the whole global economy and the search and the quest for the lowest wages sometimes ends up backfiring and blowing up in your face. And that's exactly what has happened here.
So, well, I think that is a point that was raised a couple times in our Massey dialogues. Is this pandemic going to transform globalization? Was globalization dead in any event? What are people going to change the way in which trade relations are going to end up? What about you, Stephanie? Any thoughts on the future? When you look at the future of the economy, do you see a return to a little bit more self-preservation for nations, more nationalism?
I think yes and no. Like, I think we'll always see the benefit of a globalized economy, and we're always going to need food from other places, especially here in Canada when we're unable to grow much in our winters. But at the same time, I think we are seeing in a lot of ways that we want things produced more locally, from a climate change perspective, from a workers' right perspective, from now when we close our borders and we can't get goods shipped over. We see it from that perspective as well. So I think for some things, we'll definitely see maybe a return back to Canada, but I don't think we'll be able to avoid a globalized economy and a globalized world completely.
What about you, Sylvia? Any thoughts on this? The big questions of is foreign relations transformed by this COVID-19?
Well, I think we saw a lot of superpower tensions before this pandemic, and obviously they're much worse. Relations between the U.S. and China have become increasingly tense. But I do think that the point about reshoring, if we offshored a lot of jobs, beginning with the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, January 1st, 1989, when it went into effect, if we've lost enormous numbers, hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs since that time, to reshore, not just in manufacturing, personal protective equipment, but how about pharmaceuticals? I mean, there's a lot of debate about the extent to which we have been very price-driven And so we're inclined to try and find, as Jerry pointed out, low-wage environments in which to import from. But there's a lot to be said, I think, for an ethos, not of an exclusionary nationalism by any means, but of a sense about protecting Canadians, a sense about trying to be self-sufficient, and helping each other to establish an economic model that is inclusionary within our society, because I think nationalism in a multicultural society has many, many dangers. But I think an economic nationalist approach that we saw very vibrant in Canada in the 1960s and 70s, there's a lot to be said, because some of the most innovative initiatives to try and manufacture personal protective equipment came from Canadian corporations, not just the multinationals. So I think there's a lot to be said for reshoring, and much to be said for our concern about the quality of our society. Many of the ideas that we saw brought out in debates over free trade in the 1980s and 1990s about what kind of society do we want to build? What are the values that Canada represents? I think it's important to go back to those discussions because I think that they help to reinforce a sense that cost is not the only driver when it comes to, for example, procuring antibiotics or, whatever other things besides personal protective equipment we're also very short of and domestically and very dependent on outside suppliers.
So yes, it has exposed the way in which we're very vulnerable. I really would like to talk about the gig economy a little bit, about how you see, whether you see the possibilities of unionization of a gig worker, what's the impact? I mean, by now we probably think is it here to stay? Is it going to disappear? Will it have to be, tolerated? How it's a disruptive force? So how do you see it, Jerry, if you put your crystal ball,
Well, things are clearly evolving as to the perception of the gig economy and what those are thinking that are working in it. Like 40% of people in the gig economy, I think it was Ceridian, just recently did a survey. And they said that 40% of people in the gig economy were quite happy because it gave them the flexibility to work at home. It allowed them to work within their own pace and to a large extent control their working life by themselves. But then there was 60% that says, hey, hold on here. This has got a lot of pitfalls and would like the ability to join a union. You've got about 70% of people in the gig economy are saying the pay sucks. I'd like more money. So, but the overwhelming preoccupation or consistent message from those in the gig economy is the lack of job security and the uncertainty that goes along with it. So I think that, it's one of those things, in theory, it sounds wonderful, but the practical reality, it's not all that great. I listened to the argument. I sat on a panel, if you can imagine, with a collection of hedge funds. And this person got up to speak to me that says the good thing about young people today is they like different challenges. They love going from job to job to job to job. They love the flexibility and the challenges. And then I spoke afterwards and I said, I never heard so much crap in my whole life. Young people are no different than me. They want a good job. They want a steady job. They want to have a job that they know they can go to the bank and borrow money to get a mortgage. They want to be able to raise their kids. They want to be able, everybody wants some security. So this whole argument that young people are so different, and what a pile of crap that is. So
well, let's hear from the young people here. Poor Stephanie is.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm fighting for you, that's for sure. But anyway, I'm not going to put words in Stephanie's mouth by stretching imagination. But this argument that young people just love the flexibility of going to A, B, C, D, E, F without calling anywhere home, well, that's a bit of a stretch, I would argue.
So what do you think, Stephanie? Are you a generation that likes a little bit more flexibility? Are you concerned about are there things you don't like about the way work is organized?
I don't think we're too different. Like you're saying than the generation before us. We do want stable jobs. We do want to make sure that we're not looking for work every year and going from contract to contract. I think, as any young person, you want to find out what you want to do, and some flexibility is nice, but eventually people do want to purchase housing, have children, have a more stable resource of money. So I think people do still want stability in their jobs. That's not going away anytime soon. I think we were constantly told, I think I've been hearing this since high school, that we're going to have more jobs than our parents did, and we're going to have to jump from job to job. But is that something that we've just accepted, or is that something that we can push back against and make sure that we have stability moving forward? And of course, student debt. We have so much student debt these days. We have to pay that off. It's so hard to do that when you have interest compounding and you don't have a stable job to pay that off with.
So Sylvia, do you see that the changing nature of work as being redefined or questioned after this pandemic?
Well, what I certainly see all kinds of questions about the gig economy and younger workers and so on. I fear that there may be this generational divide that is exploited by people who want to see a race to the bottom. Right. So telling people, well, you're either going to take care of seniors in long-term care and give baby boomers pensions, or, you're going to invest in younger people. So it's kind of being created, I think, as a kind of dangerous divide and conquer strategy, where I believe that the fact that a lot of young people who were working in food delivery in Ontario wanted to join a union, and then they're a company that claimed it wasn't an employer, it was, these people were independent contractors, whatever, got up and left the province, right? That to me suggests that, there is an effort to kind of intimidate. That's to create fear, right? That if you unionize, your employer is going to leave. And that's not unique to the gig economy. We saw that the Obamas did a film called American Factory that talks about how, efforts to unionize in a glass plant in Ohio met the very same pushback as this food delivery company was using here in Ontario. It's not peculiar to the gig economy nor to Ontario, but it does speak to this effort to instill fear in the minds of people who are told that you can have either this or that, and you need low taxes and low cost and all the rest of this, and we'll have a race to the bottom. And, I think that unbridled individualism is very dangerous. I don't think it's consistent with a lot of core Canadian values. And I would want to see us avoid this notion of opening up these big generational divides, because I think we want to share the wealth and share the benefits of living in this country, and not see ourselves divided into these segments, particularly by generation.
Well, and I want to go back to Jerry a little bit about this. I mean, we've seen unionization not expand that much. I mean, so that's the challenge. I mean, how do you get to these new workers and unionize them, give them a better job, better security, and so on? Is that how does it feel in the union movement? How do you see like this massive amount of people that should be unionized, so they get better protection, and their employer that just does not just pick up and go? So is there a conscious raising around this issue in the union movement?
Well, there's no question. That's the discussion, that if we had the answer, there would be 100% unionization rate. The company that Sylvia was talking about is Foodora. Yeah. They were couriers that organized, and then of course Foodora just closed up shop. So they were taking the lesson right out of the Walmart handbook on how to break unions. But I think, I have a lot of confidence in young people today, and young people are a lot more educated than we were. Like I think about it. Like I would say to my kids, look, go to school, go to college, go to university, get your education, and the world will be right there for you. So they did. They went to school, they went to college, they went to university, they got school debts coming out of here. And then what do? They want to move back home because they can't afford the rent. So we got a huge problem here. So young people are legitimately disillusioned and feel betrayed because they have been. So young people aren't going to put up with the crap. They're highly educated, they're motivated. They have, the whole, if you talk about the age of the computerization, social media, look, there are a lot, young people are much more organized than we ever were, and they have the tools in which to get organized. So, look, when people get sick and tired of getting pushed around, then they talk about how they can come together. Within Unifor, we have a lot of workers, precarious workers, part-timers that have joined together under our freelance union. So we have our traditional unionized workplaces, but then we have, community chapters where workers don't work for an individual employer. So we're bringing together a lot of freelancers for the purpose of discussion that says, how do we organize ourselves? How do we bring together works and community groups, come together so we can talk to you about how we can help you? So, look, the unionization rate has not dropped very dramatically in Canada like it has in the United States. But I think that's because we're a much more social nation as well. So, am I worried about the future? Always am. But I don't think it's fatal. I think young people are going to take the ball and run with it.
So you would be, Stephanie, would you be fighting for unionization in a workplace? Is that one of the strategy that you see, or would it be a different strategy, or just trying to, devise want shares or something like that? How do you see the future when you look at what's ahead of you? Are you looking for a unionized job? Would be my question.
Yeah, I think a lot of young people are going to be looking for high quality jobs, whether that's in a union or a job that cares about its workers. I saw on Twitter, people are going to ask during their next job interview, how did you handle the COVID pandemic and how did you treat your workers? So I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about that when they're going into workplaces. They want to make sure that they're respected and that they have rights, and that when a crisis happens, again, we don't know when, but whenever another crisis happens, that will be protected. So maybe that looks like unions, maybe like you said, that looks like shares, but I think people are going to be a lot more
wary,
cognizant of how they're treated in the workplace.
Any comments, Sylvia, on this issue of the future of unionization?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that we can think about is not just ourselves as workers, but also, for example, as people who might want our pension plans to invest in companies that treat their workers well, that treated them well during this pandemic, that permit unionization, that are proactive when it comes to sexual harassment and other very gendered behaviors in the workplace. So I think there are ways to sort of train a spotlight on what's going on in order to try and advance an agenda that talks about our development as a society and not just our individual experiences in a particular workplace. So this larger social perspective, it seems to me, can be brought to bear in all kinds of fields, including banking, hedge funds, investments, and so on, pension plans, that gets us out of just talking about collective agreements in a workplace.
So the range of actions as a consumer, as an investor, we're getting to the end of our hour, so I want to let you to speak, give your concluding remarks to our audience a little bit. So let's start with you, Jerry. So what are you worried about for the next 6 months, and what do you encourage all Canadians to do?
Well, what I'm worried about is we didn't learn anything from what has transpired over the last few months. My biggest concern and my biggest fear is that when all the dust settles, those workers that we depended on so much, that the governments won't be there recognizing and pushing for the wages that they deserve and ultimately the respect that they deserve. I'm hoping that when we come out of this, I'm afraid that, the water will be under the bridge and we won't sit back as a nation and say, hey, hold on here. What happens if this happens again? Will we be prepared? Are we going to have the manufacturing capabilities in order to take care of ourselves in case of an emergency? Are we going to slide back into the same old globalized mentality of, we'll just offshore everything to the lowest common denominator? I think the one thing we have to be cognizant of, we are a trading nation, by the way, and I'm a trader. 85% of everything my members make are sold to other countries or exported. So what we need to be as a nation that understands the importance of fair trade. It has to be, I'll give you something, you give me something. There has to be a balance, because as a nation, we have so much to offer, and we ought not to ever forget that.
Well, thank you so much. Stephanie, your thoughts, concluding thoughts here on what you're afraid of and what you'd like Canada to be within the next 6 months?
For sure. I think, like Jerry, I'm afraid that we're not going to learn anything, that it's going to go back to a business as usual, but that's not going to be the case, and that's probably a good thing in a lot of ways. We need to be protecting our workers. We need to be thinking more locally and supporting local businesses, and making sure that we are respectful of everyone, and we make sure that we're protecting each other. I'm hopeful that we start thinking about how we redesign workplaces, how we redesign cities, and make sure that we come back as a stronger society that's better for everyone, and we don't leave anyone behind.
Sylvia, last words to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm a believer in the idea that change creates opportunity, and that we have an opportunity to reach for the best in ourselves. So this pandemic, I think, offers us an opportunity to revalue the way we treat half the population, particularly older women, immigrant women, minority women who are working in all kinds of difficult, frontline, and dangerous jobs. It's a chance to come together, and I hope we use that opportunity to move that agenda forward.
Well, thank you. Merci beaucoup. It's wonderful to have you. It was really quite interesting, and lots to talk about and lots to continue to. We will watch about what's happening in the next 6 months, and I hope that we can talk to you again about the challenges of unionization, challenges of sexism in the workplace, and who are the workers who will emerge from this crisis, and how we're going to treat them. So I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank our staff who are helping out behind the scene, Matt and Abra. Thank you very much for being there, for being our good workers here. And I also want to talk a little bit about next Thursday. We're going to have the Right Honourable Beverly McLaughlin, the former Chief Justice of Canada. She will be talking about justice in times of COVID. So I hope that you will join me next Thursday. Thank you.